Welcome to the channel, Fear of Darkness. Today's story takes us to 1859 and follows Seraphina Drake, an enslaved black girl whose beauty became a curse. The mistress could not stand the attention Seraphina drew, and what she did next went beyond cruelty. She kept her chained and hidden for 10 long years. This is an intense and difficult story, so breathe for a moment, and listen carefully. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below which city and country you're listening from. Your participation helps ensure these stories are remembered, not buried. Let's begin. In the spring of 1859, in a small cabin behind the Whitmore plantation in Warren County, Mississippi, a baby girl was born with amber-colored eyes and skin that seemed to glow even in dim candlelight. Her mother, a field slave named Ruth, looked at her newborn daughter and felt something she had rarely known in her 32 years of bondage. She felt fear, not the ordinary fear of the overseer's whip or the master's temper. This was a different terror. With an instinct only a mother possesses, Ruth understood that her daughter's extraordinary beauty would become either a salvation or a destruction. She named the child Seraphina, after the highest order of angels, a name she had heard the plantation mistress read years earlier from a book of religious poetry. Ruth could not read or write, but she never forgot that word. Seraphina, the burning ones, the angels closest to God. She whispered it into her daughter's ear that first night, praying that heaven might protect what she knew she could not. The Whitmore plantation stretched across 1,800 acres of some of the richest cotton land in the Mississippi Delta. The main house sat on a gentle rise overlooking the fields, a two-story Greek Revival mansion with white columns and wide verandas that seemed to mock the suffering that made its grandeur possible. In 1859, the plantation held 147 enslaved people and produced nearly 500 bales of cotton each year, making the Whitmore family one of the wealthiest in the region. The master was Colonel James Whitmore, 63 years old, with a reputation for running what he called a tight operation. He rarely visited the slave quarters, leaving daily management to his overseers and his wife. James Whitmore spent most of his time in Vicksburg, attending to business and political meetings. He had served 2 terms in the Mississippi state legislature and considered himself a gentleman of the highest order. He owned human beings as casually as he owned horses or furniture, never questioning the morality of the institution that made him rich. But the true power of the Whitmore household lay not with the colonel, but with his wife, Helena. In 1859, she was 41, once considered the most beautiful debutante in Natchez society. Time and disappointment had hardened her features and poisoned her heart. She had given her husband 3 sons, all of whom survived to adulthood, and she considered this her greatest accomplishment. But Helena Whitmore lived with a secret bitterness that colored everything she did. She knew her beauty was fading. She saw it every morning in the mirror, in the fine lines around her eyes and the slight loosening of her jaw. And she could not bear it. Helena ruled over the domestic slaves with an iron hand. She personally supervised the house servants, cooks, laundresses, and nursemaids. Nothing escaped her attention. She prided herself on maintaining what she called proper order, complete submission from every enslaved person who worked inside her home. The field slaves answered to the overseers, the house slaves answered to Helena, and Helena answered to no one. For the first 7 years of her life, Seraphina lived in relative obscurity. She stayed with her mother in the small cabin behind the main house where Ruth worked as a laundress. The work was brutal. Ruth spent 14 hours a day washing, boiling, and pressing the fine linens and clothing of the Whitmore family. Her hands were permanently scarred from lye soap and scalding water. But she kept her daughter close, teaching her to stay quiet, stay invisible, and stay alive. Seraphina learned these lessons well. She helped her mother carry water from the well and sort dirty laundry. She learned to fold sheets perfectly, without a single wrinkle. She learned to walk softly, speak only when spoken to, and never look a white person directly in the eye. These were the rules of survival every enslaved child absorbed before understanding their meaning. But there was one thing Ruth could not teach her daughter to hide. She could not dim the light that seemed to radiate from Seraphina's face. By the time the girl turned 7, her beauty had become impossible to ignore. Her amber eyes seemed to change color with the light, shifting from deep gold to honey brown. Her features were perfectly symmetrical, high cheekbones, a delicate chin. Her skin was flawless, a deep brown that seemed to hold warmth even in the coldest weather. And when she smiled, which she rarely did, the effect was almost startling. The other enslaved people noticed first. They whispered among themselves, some in admiration, some in warning. Old Bessie, who worked in the kitchen and claimed to have the gift of sight, told Ruth, "Keep that child hidden. That kind of pretty brings nothing but trouble. Either the men gonna want her, or the women gonna hate her. Either way, it ends in blood." Ruth tried. She kept Seraphina in their cabin as much as possible. She dressed the girl in the plainest, most shapeless clothes she could find. She rubbed dirt on her face and kept her hair wrapped tight under a rough cloth. But beauty like Seraphina's could not be concealed any more than the sun could be hidden behind a handkerchief. It shone through everything. The day that changed everything came in September of 1859. The summer heat had broken, and Helena Whitmore decided to walk through the domestic work areas for one of her inspections. She did this periodically, appearing without warning to criticize the enslaved people's work and remind them of their place. That afternoon, she walked past the laundry area just as Seraphina emerged from the cabin carrying a basket of folded linens. The girl did not see the mistress approaching. She was focused on balancing the heavy basket, trying not to drop the carefully pressed sheets. The cloth had slipped from her head, and her hair fell in soft waves around her face. The afternoon sun caught her at just the right angle, illuminating her features with a golden light. Helena Whitmore stopped walking. She stood perfectly still for several seconds, staring at the child with an expression witnesses later struggled to describe. It was not anger, not exactly. It was something deeper and more dangerous, the look of a woman confronting something she could not accept. Ruth saw the mistress and felt her blood turn to ice. She dropped the shirt she was wringing and rushed toward her daughter, but she was too late. Helena had already seen. And what Helena saw, she could never unsee. That night, Helena lay awake in her canopied bed, staring at the ceiling while her husband snored beside her. She could not stop thinking about the slave girl. She could not stop comparing. When she closed her eyes, she saw those amber irises and that perfect skin, and she felt a rage building inside her that frightened even herself. How dare this child, this piece of property, possess what Helena was losing? How dare she exist at all? By morning, Helena had made her decision. She told herself it was about discipline, about maintaining proper order. She told herself the girl had been insolent, had failed to show proper respect, had looked at her with defiance. None of this was true. But Helena repeated it until she almost believed it. The truth, which she would never admit, even in her own mind, was simpler. She could not bear to look at Seraphina, and if she could not destroy the girl's beauty, she would hide it where no one would ever see it again. The cellar beneath the Whitmore mansion had been used for storage since the house was built in 1841. It was a large space, nearly 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with stone walls and a dirt floor. One section held the Colonel's collection of imported French wines. The back portion remained unused, a dark, damp space even the house servants rarely entered. This was where Helena decided to put the girl. She gave the orders to the overseer, Thomas Crenshaw, who carried them out without question. He was paid well not to ask questions. That evening, after the Colonel had retired to his study, 2 domestic slaves came to Ruth's cabin under Crenshaw's supervision. They took Seraphina while Ruth screamed and begged. They dragged her across the yard, into the main house through the back entrance, down the wooden stairs into the cellar, and chained her to an iron ring bolted into the stone wall. Ruth tried to follow. She fought against the hands holding her back, scratching and biting like a wild animal. Crenshaw struck her across the face with the back of his hand, knocking her down. "If you say one word about this," he told her, "I will sell you to the traders, and you will never see this place again. You will never know what happened to your girl. Understand me?" Ruth understood. She understood she was powerless. She understood her daughter had been swallowed by the earth. And she understood there was nothing she could do. The first night in the cellar, Seraphina did not understand what was happening. She cried for her mother until her voice gave out. She pulled at the chain around her ankle until the iron cut her skin and blood ran down her foot. She called for help, but her voice could not penetrate the thick stone walls and heavy wooden door. No one came. No one would come. The cellar was almost completely dark. A tiny window, no bigger than a man's hand, sat high on the wall near the ceiling. It let in a thin sliver of daylight in the afternoon, just enough to distinguish day from night. But most of the time, Seraphina existed in total blackness. She could not see her own hands in front of her face. She could not see the walls imprisoning her. She could only feel the cold stone beneath her and the weight of the chain on her leg. Helena established a routine that continued for the next 10 years. Twice a day, a kitchen slave brought a bowl of food to the cellar, cold cornmeal mush in the morning, scraps from the family's dinner in the evening. The slave was forbidden to speak to Seraphina, forbidden to bring a light, forbidden to tell anyone about the girl in the cellar. Helena made it clear any violation meant immediate sale to slave traders. For the first few months, Seraphina screamed whenever someone opened the cellar door. She begged for release. She promised to be good, to be invisible, to do whatever they wanted. But the slaves who brought her food could not help her. They were as trapped as she was. Time became meaningless. Days blended into weeks, weeks dissolved into months. She slept when tired, ate when food appeared, cried until she had no tears left. Then, slowly, something inside her began to change. The human mind is remarkably adaptable. Faced with conditions that should have driven her to madness, Seraphina's consciousness found ways to survive. She created structure from nothingness. She counted breaths in sets of 100. She recited every word she remembered her mother saying, replaying conversations until they felt real. She traced patterns on the stone floor, memorizing their shapes in darkness. She invented games, stories, entire worlds in her imagination. But the most important adaptation was learning to listen. The cellar sat beneath the main floor. The stone walls muffled most sounds, but wooden floorboards allowed certain noises through. Pressing her ear to the wall, she began to distinguish words, then sentences, then entire conversations. She heard everything that happened in the Whitmore household. She heard the colonel arguing about debts and cotton prices. She heard Helena berating house slaves. She heard the 3 Whitmore sons discussing plans and secrets. She heard visitors arrive and depart, whispered confessions, shouted accusations. The house held no secrets she did not eventually discover, and she remembered everything. By her second year in the cellar, Seraphina had developed a mental catalogue of the family's most guarded information. She knew the colonel had borrowed heavily to cover hidden gambling debts. She knew the eldest son, William, had fathered a child with a free black woman and was paying for silence. She knew the middle son, Robert, had stolen family silver to fund his drinking. She knew the youngest, Thomas Jr., was terrified of his mother and often cried himself to sleep. She also knew things about Helena. She knew Helena had pushed a house slave down the stairs, causing her to lose an unborn baby, and called it an accident. She knew Helena skimmed money into a private fund. She knew Helena had forged a letter to destroy her own sister's engagement 20 years earlier, a secret never told. This knowledge became Seraphina's most precious possession. In the darkness, where she had nothing else, she had power, not to escape, not yet, but the power of knowing, waiting, understanding her enemies better than they understood themselves. The years passed with agonizing slowness. Seraphina grew from a child into a young woman entirely in that cellar. Her body adapted as best it could. The chain left a permanent scar around her ankle. Her muscles weakened. Her skin grew ashen from never seeing sunlight. Her amber eyes developed the ability to see in near total darkness. But her mind grew stronger. Without external stimulation, she turned inward, developing a memory so precise she could recall conversations word for word years later. She taught herself to think in organized patterns, analyze information, make connections. She played mental chess against herself, devising complex strategies. Unknowingly, she was training herself to become something the Whitmore family could never have imagined: dangerous. Her mother, Ruth, tried to reach her. For the first 3 years, Ruth bribed a kitchen slave to pass whispered messages through food deliveries: "Your mama loves you. Stay strong. I'm still here. These fragments kept Seraphina from losing hope entirely. But in the winter of 1862, the messages stopped. Seraphina waited weeks, then months. Finally, she overheard Helena and the housekeeper, Ruth, had died of pneumonia, worked through a fever, afraid to rest. Buried in an unmarked grave. Seraphina did not cry. She had exhausted her tears years earlier. Instead, she felt something new crystallizing inside her, cold, hard, patient, like a diamond forming under pressure. It was hatred, not hot, explosive anger, but the kind that could wait, plan, endure anything to achieve its purpose. And now she knew exactly what that purpose would be. The war had begun. Seraphina heard endless conversations through the floorboards. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, and the South celebrated. The Whitmore household was caught in patriotic fervor. The colonel gave speeches, the sons argued about enlisting, Helena organized sewing circles. They believed the war would be short, glorious, the Yankees defeated within months. Seraphina knew better. She heard the colonel's private conversations with less optimistic associates. She heard concerns about British neutrality, the Union blockade, winning a war of attrition. By 1862, reality began to penetrate even the plantation's isolation. Cotton prices collapsed. William came home with a bullet wound and stories of carnage. Supplies grew scarce. Overseers were drafted, replaced by older men and boys. The enslaved grew restless, sensing change. In her cellar, Seraphina waited. She had been in darkness 5 years now, learning the most important lesson: patience was power, silence was strength, what people tried to bury had a way of rising. She was 17, hadn't seen sunlight since 7, hadn't heard a kind word since her mother died. But she knew with certainty beyond logic that her time would come. The house above was crumbling. She heard it in every worried conversation, angry argument, desperate prayer. The Whitmores were running out of money, allies, time. The world that created their wealth was collapsing, and they were too blind to see. But Seraphina saw. In the darkness where they threw her, she saw everything. And she was ready. Spring 1864 brought changes Seraphina tracked through sounds above. Conversations grew desperate. Helena argued about selling land to cover debts. William, weakened, discussed defeat with his brothers. House servants moved with less caution, spoke more freely. The balance of power shifted. Food deliveries became irregular, sometimes a full day without food. She stretched meager rations, ignored constant hunger. Her body adapted to near starvation, thin and wiry. When others might have died, she endured. In November 1864, she heard of Sherman's march, Union General William Sherman cutting a path of destruction through Georgia, burning everything toward the sea. The terror in Helena's voice was unmistakable. If Sherman turned north into Mississippi, all they built would be destroyed. Seraphina listened to their fear and, for the first time in 7 years, smiled. The winter of 1864–65 was the hardest the plantation had known. The Confederate economy collapsed. Paper money was nearly worthless. Most slaves had run away. Overseers abandoned their posts. Fields lay fallow, cotton rotting. Helena reduced household staff to 3 enslaved people with nowhere else to go. She dismissed the cook and worked the kitchen herself, something she'd never done. Meals grew simpler. The wine cellar emptied and sold. Silver was pawned piece by piece. The great house showed neglect, peeling paint, crooked shutters, wild gardens. Through it all, Seraphina remained in her cellar. Helena seemed to have forgotten her, consumed with disaster above ground. Food deliveries grew more sporadic, sometimes 3 or 4 days without opening the cellar door. Seraphina survived on rainwater seeping through the tiny window and rats caught with bare hands. She had become something less than human and more than human, stripped to pure will and burning purpose. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over. The Confederacy was dead. In the darkness beneath the Whitmore mansion, a young woman imprisoned nearly 6 years, heard the news and knew her moment approached. Weeks after surrender brought chaos to Warren County. Union troops moved through, enforcing terms and spreading word of emancipation. Plantation owners faced collapse. Some fled, some took their own lives, others like the Whitmores refused to believe their world ended. Helena continued running her household as if nothing changed. She gave orders with the same imperious tone, spoke of the situation as temporary, a setback before proper order restored. Her denial bordered on madness. The colonel, broken, retreated to his study and drank himself stuporous daily. The 3 sons scattered, William to Vicksburg to salvage business interests, Robert disappeared entirely, Thomas Jr. stayed, too afraid to leave, too weak to be useful. In the cellar, Seraphina waited. She had waited nearly 6 years. She could wait a little longer. The moment came on a warm evening in late May. Seraphina listened to sounds above, tracking movements as she had for years. She heard Helena retire, the colonel's drunken snoring, Thomas Jr. pacing. Then she heard something new, the cellar door opening at an unusual hour. A figure descended with a candle. The light, dim as it was, seemed blinding to Seraphina's darkness-adapted eyes. She shrank back, shielding her face. She thought Helena had come to kill her, eliminate evidence before Union authorities discovered it. But the voice was not Helena's. It was old Bessie, the kitchen slave who had warned Ruth years ago. Bessie was 73 now, one of the few enslaved who remained because she was too old and weak to run. But she had never forgotten the girl in the cellar. With the old order crumbling, she decided to act. "Girl," Bessie whispered, voice cracking. "The war is over. You are free. Do you understand? You are free." Seraphina lowered her hands, squinting against candlelight. She hadn't seen a human face in nearly 6 years. Bessie's weathered features, illuminated by flickering flame, seemed from a dream. Bessie brought tools, a hammer, chisel, stolen from the shed days earlier. She knelt and worked on the iron ring. The metal was rusted, weakened by years of moisture. It took nearly an hour, but the ring broke free. Seraphina stood for the first time in years. Her legs barely supported her. Muscles had atrophied. She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, feeling the strange sensation of standing upright after so long crouching and lying on cold stone. Bessie helped her up the stairs, one agonizing step at a time. The cellar door opened onto a hallway near the kitchen. Dark, but compared to cellar blackness, it seemed flooded with light. Seraphina blinked, tears streaming as her eyes struggled to adjust. "You need to go," Bessie said. "Get away before they find you gone. Union soldiers in Vicksburg will help you." But Seraphina didn't move toward the door. She turned and looked back into the house, toward main rooms where the Whitmores slept. Her face, gaunt and pale from years of darkness, showed no expression, but her amber eyes burned with a light that made Bessie step back. "No," Seraphina said, her voice rusty, barely a whisper but clear. "I am not leaving. Not yet." Bessie argued, staying was dangerous, Helena would kill her, the only sense was to run. But Seraphina hadn't survived 6 years in that cellar by being sensible. She survived by becoming something else, something that didn't run from enemies, something that hunted them. She told Bessie to return to her cabin, pretend nothing happened, act normal tomorrow. "Whatever happens," Seraphina said, "you did not see me. You know nothing. Understand?" Bessie understood. She'd lived under people who destroyed what they couldn't control. She saw that quality in Seraphina's eyes. Whatever the girl became in darkness, she wasn't a victim anymore. She was far more dangerous. That night, while the Whitmores slept, Seraphina explored the house she'd only known through sounds. She moved silently, bare feet noiseless on wooden floors. The layout matched her mental map from years of listening. She knew which floorboards creaked, which doors squeaked, where everyone slept and when they woke. She found Helena's private office on the 2nd floor, a small room for personal papers. The door was locked, but the lock was old, poorly maintained. Seraphina worked it with a hairpin found on a dresser, skills never taught but intuited during isolation. It clicked open within minutes. The office was as she imagined, a writing desk near the window, a cabinet, stacks of papers and ledgers organized with Helena's precision. Seraphina moved methodically, examining each document by thin moonlight. Her eyes, comfortable in darkness, had no difficulty reading. She found everything she sought and more. Doctored household accounts proving Helena stole from her husband for years. Letters documenting the cover-up of the slave woman's death on the stairs. Correspondence with New Orleans lawyers revealing the full extent of family debts, worse than the colonel knew. And she found something unexpected, a letter from a Natchez doctor dated 1858 confirming Helena was barren, and the 3 sons she claimed were purchased from a slave trader dealing in light-skinned children who could pass for white. This was staggering. The Whitmore sons weren't Whitmores at all, they were enslaved women's children, bought as infants, raised as white aristocrats. Helena maintained this deception over 30 years, terrified truth would destroy her social standing and marriage. It was her most closely guarded secret. Now it belonged to Seraphina. She took the most important documents and hid them outside the house in a location identified during exploration. Then she returned to the cellar, closing the door behind her. At dawn, she was back in darkness, chain arranged to look attached. No one would know she'd left. For 2 weeks, Seraphina continued nocturnal explorations. She grew stronger each day, exercising in darkness, rebuilding atrophied muscles. She ate better, taking food from the kitchen at night. Color returned to her skin. Movements became fluid, controlled. She prepared for what was to come. During days, she listened. William returned from Vicksburg with terrible news, remaining assets seized by Union authorities. The New Orleans bank demanded immediate repayment of gambling debts, threatening legal action. Creditors circled. Helena's response was to double down on denial, insist they could rebuild, old ways would return, just hold on until proper order restored. But her voice held a desperate, brittle quality Seraphina recognized. The mistress was losing control. Her constructed world fell apart, and she didn't know the final blow would come from beneath her feet. Seraphina chose her moment carefully. On a Sunday morning in mid-June, while the family breakfasted, she emerged from the cellar for the last time. She'd washed in the kitchen basin, dressed in clothes taken from a storage trunk, old, slightly too large, but clean. She'd brushed her hair, pinned it simply. For the first time in nearly 6 years, she looked almost human. She walked into the dining room without sound. The family sat around the long mahogany table, picking at meager breakfast of cornbread and weak coffee. Helena at one end, the colonel at the other, Thomas Jr. between them, eyes fixed on his plate. None noticed her at first. Then Helena looked up and screamed, a barely human sound, seeing a ghost, the dead risen, a nightmare made flesh. She knocked over her chair, stumbled backward, pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. The colonel stared in confusion, not understanding. He never knew about the girl in the cellar. To him, this was a strange young black woman who'd entered his home. His instinct was to call for help, but no one was left. "Good morning," Seraphina said, voice calm, clear, stronger now. "I believe we have matters to discuss." Helena found her voice. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out of my house. I will have you whipped. I will have you killed. I will." "You will do nothing," Seraphina interrupted, tone almost gentle but with steel beneath. "You will sit and listen, because I have things your husband needs to hear." The colonel looked between Seraphina and his wife, seeing Helena's terror, not understanding. "What is the meaning of this?" "Helena, who is this woman?" "That," Seraphina said, "is an excellent question. Why don't you tell him, Mrs. Whitmore? Tell him where I've been 6 years. Tell him what you did to a 7-year-old child because you couldn't bear to look at her face." And she told him everything, the cellar, the chain, years of darkness, isolation, near starvation, rats, absence of human contact. She described it simply, precisely, without emotion, like testimony in court. The colonel listened in growing horror. Whatever his faults, complicity in slavery, he never sanctioned this. He believed himself a gentleman of honor. His wife imprisoning a child in their cellar for years, torturing her with isolation and neglect, was almost beyond comprehension. Helena denied it, called Seraphina a liar, runaway, thief breaking in, but denials were weak, contradicted by terror when Seraphina appeared. And when Seraphina produced documents from inside her dress, Helena's face went white. "These are from your private office," Seraphina said. "The household accounts you doctored for years. Letters about the woman on the stairs. And this 1 inch," she held up the doctor's letter, "is particularly interesting." Helena lunged, trying to snatch it, but Seraphina was faster. She stepped aside, and Helena crashed into the dining table, dishes falling. "Your sons," Seraphina told the colonel. "They aren't your sons. They aren't your wife's sons. They were purchased from a slave trader in 1829, 1831, and 1834, light-skinned children who could pass for white. Your wife lied to you over 30 years. The colonel stared at the letter. His face grayed. He looked at Helena, sobbing, collapsed against the table, her world crumbling. Thomas Jr. sat frozen, unable to process. Everything he believed about himself, family, place in the world destroyed in minutes. He wasn't a Whitmore. He wasn't white. He was the son of a slave, purchased like property, raised in a lie. The Whitmore family's destruction happened quickly after that morning. The colonel, confronted with his wife's deception, suffered a stroke within hours. He survived but was paralyzed on his left side, couldn't speak clearly. He spent remaining years in a wheelchair, cared for by servants now free and paid wages the family couldn't afford. Helena was arrested 2 days later. Seraphina sent copies of incriminating documents and her account to the Union commander in Vicksburg. Occupation authorities wanted examples of justice in the defeated South. Helena Whitmore, a wealthy white woman who imprisoned a child in a cellar for 6 years, was perfect. Tried by military tribunal, sentenced to 15 years. She died of typhoid fever in her cell less than 2 years later. The 3 Whitmore sons scattered. William, eldest, couldn't accept his origins. 3 weeks after the revelation, he put a pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. Robert, middle son, disappeared. Some said west to California, others said he drank himself to death in a New Orleans boarding house. Thomas Jr., youngest, reacted differently. He sought Seraphina after everything fell apart, begged for information about his real mother. She couldn't tell him much, records incomplete, trail cold, but told what she knew. She watched something change in his eyes. He moved north to Philadelphia, lived as a black man the rest of his life, teaching in a school for freedmen's children. The Whitmore plantation was seized by the federal government and redistributed to formerly enslaved people under General Sherman's Special Field Orders No. 15. The Great White House was divided into apartments for 3 black families. Cotton fields parceled into small farms. The world James and Helena Whitmore built wasn't just destroyed, it transformed into something they'd find unimaginable, a community of free people owning land, building lives belonging to them. And Seraphina walked away. She left Warren County summer 1865, headed north. No money, possessions, family alive. But she had something more valuable. She survived, triumphed, took everything from those who tried to destroy her, not with violence, but truth. Secrets they tried to keep became weapons of their destruction. She went to Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago. Worked as domestic servant, seamstress, cook. Saved money carefully, spending only necessary. Taught herself to read and write with newspapers and books discarded in houses where she worked. The mind that kept her sane in darkness, memorized years of conversations, mastered written word easily. By 1870, Seraphina saved enough to open a small boarding house in Chicago's growing black community. She ran it 23 years, providing clean rooms and hot meals to black travelers turned away from white establishments. She never married, never had children. When asked about her past, she said only she grew up in Mississippi, left after the war. She didn't speak of the cellar, the Whitmores. That chapter closed. But she kept one thing from those years. In a small wooden box under a bedroom floorboard, she kept the chain that bound her ankle nearly 6 years. Iron rusted, links weakened, but still recognizable. Sometimes late at night, she'd take it out, feel its weight, remember. She kept it not from sentiment, but as a reminder of what humans could do to each other, what she endured and overcame, that no matter how dark darkness became, there was always a way back to light. Seraphina Drake died in Chicago February 14, 1912. She was 60. Her obituary in the Chicago Defender described her as a respected businesswoman, pillar of her community, her boarding house, charitable work with Southern migrants, quiet dignity and strength. It didn't mention Mississippi, the Whitmores, the cellar. But some knew. Old Bessie, who lived until 1889, told the story to grandchildren. Formerly enslaved from Whitmore Plantation shared whispered accounts of the girl who emerged from darkness and destroyed captors with truth alone. The story passed down generations, changing as oral histories do, becoming more legend than fact. Perhaps fitting, because Seraphina Drake's story isn't just one woman's, it's everyone buried alive by injustice who found a way to rise. Its secrets oppressors try to hide and truth that surfaces. Its beauty undestroyed, spirit unbroken, vengeance patient and complete. Helena Whitmore tried to bury Seraphina in darkness because she couldn't bear to look at her. She thought hiding the girl away meant she didn't exist. She thought chains, stone walls, years of isolation would destroy what she couldn't possess. She was wrong. Darkness didn't destroy Seraphina, it forged her. Made her sharper, stronger, more patient than any enemy imagined. Taught her to listen when others spoke carelessly, remember when others forgot. Taught her powerful cruelty is built on secrets, and secrets are fragile foundations. In the end, Helena Whitmore was undone not by force, but truth, not by violence, but patience, not by hatred, but by the simple unstoppable power of a human being refusing to be erased. She spent years trying to hide Seraphina from the world. But the world finds what's hidden. Sometimes what emerges from darkness is more powerful than what put it there. This is Seraphina Drake's story, the prisoner of beauty, the girl in the cellar, the woman who waited 10 years in darkness and emerged to bring light to those who wronged her. Buried over a century, lost in the ocean of suffering that was American slavery. But stories like hers surface, rise through cracks in history, demand to be heard, because truth can't be chained forever. And beauty, real beauty, the human spirit's beauty, can survive anything. Even 6 years of darkness, a lifetime of injustice, determined cruelty of those who fear what they can't control. Seraphina Drake knew this. She learned it in the cellar beneath Whitmore Mansion, endless darkness where she should have been destroyed. She carried that knowledge her whole life. Now, over a century after her death, her story carries it forward still. Some chains are iron, others are secrets and lies. Both can be broken, both will be broken. It's only a matter of time. And Seraphina had all the time in the world.